Nishmas Shal Yaakov ben Tzvi Meir Shali Shechter, by his wife L'Vadol Chaim Tovim Shoshana Shechter Shama Shav and Aliyah. A well-known medrash, a Gemara, which Rashi quotes in this week's parsha, which we've discussed in the past, that I would like to add a little bit of depth to. We know that the pasuk tells us, Parshas Pekudei, Betzalel ben Uri ben Chur lemat Yehuda, also as kol asher tziva Hashem es Moshe, did everything that the Rebbeinu Shalom commanded Moshe Rabbeinu. Rashi tells us, Asher Tziva ein k'ksuv kan, ela kol Asher Tziva. Why doesn't it say Asher Tziva, but rather it says kol Asher Tziva? Afilu dvarim shaloi amar loi Rabbi. Even things that Moshe Rabbeinu were told that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't tell to Betzalel, still, even those things that the Rebbeinu Shalom said to Moshe but never got communicated to Betzalel, Betzalel was mechavein to those as well. Kol asher tziva Hashem es Moshe. Ki Moshe tziva leBetzalel asos kelim va'achar kach mishkan. As the Gemara tells us, Moshe Rabbeinu told Betzalel, even though the Rebbeinu Shalom told him to first make the Mishkan and then the Kelim, Moshe Rabbeinu, when communicating to Betzalel, flipped the order. First told him to make the Kelim, and then the Mishkan, as the Gemara tells us. This, in fact, is where Betzalel got his name from. Betzalel al shem chachmasai nikra. B'shasha amru HaKadosh Baruch Hu LeMoshe leichem mar leBetzalel asei li Mishkan Aron v'Kelim. Make me a Mishkan, then Aron, then Kelim. Halach Moshe v'hafach. Moshe switched to it. V'amar lo asei Aron v'Kelim el Mishkan. Make an Aron, Kelim, and then a Mishkan. Amar lo, Betzalel turns to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu min hagel shel olam. Derech ha'olam is to first you build the house and then you bring the furniture into the house. If I build the kelim first, so then where am I going to put the kelim? Leheichan achnisam. Where are I going to put them? Shema kach amar la HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Maybe is it possible, Moshe Rabbeinu, that the Rebbeinu Shalom really told you first I should build a mishkan and then the kelim? Moshe Rabbeinu says, Amar lo shema Betzalel hayisa v'yadata. You must be Betzalel in the shade of the Rebbeinu Shalom to have come up with such a svara on your own. And of course, Kol HaMedrash Omer Darsheni. That doesn't make any sense. This is something that seems to be fairly obvious. First you have to build the house, first you build the Mishkan, and then only after that do you put in the Kelim. So we have many, many questions. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu switch it around? And if for whatever reason Moshe Rabbeinu switched it around, Me'ikara Maikasavar, and then when Betzalel told him the obvious reason why it's the wrong order, so why is he acquiesced? What was his Havamina? What was his Maskana? And whatever his Maskana was, this is such a great Svara, Shema Betzalel, we're going to call you Betzalel because you realize this unbelievable Svara that first you have to build a Mishkan, and only then will you have a place to bring the Kelim. The whole entire medrash is something which is somewhat perplexing. We've explained in the past, based al pi pshat, the following, that what's going on over here is really a fundamental machlokes between Moshe Rabbeinu and Betzalel. Moshe Rabbeinu was the only man on earth, only member of Klal Yisrael certainly, who was not influenced by the Chet HaEgel. He was literally an Ish HaElokim. And for an Ish HaElokim, there is no need for one to set boundaries for Ruchnius, because the entire world permeates Ruchnius. There is no need, just like Pri Chet HaEgel, the Mefarshim explain, it would be B'chol Makom Asher Azkir Hashemi, wherever you want, you could create a Makom Hashchina. You don't need a centralized place for the Mishkan, because the entire world, it permeates with Kedusha. So Moshe Rabbeinu as well didn't see the need for mechitzos, didn't see the need to block off, separate, segregate an area to create a Kedusha. And therefore he says, first we'll build the mechitzos are just a not unnecessary part of the Mishkan. Why would you build those first? It's the least necessary part. Get the Mishkan up and running, put on Aron, the Mizbeach, the Kelim, and then you could build walls around. Says Betzalel, Moshe Rabbeinu, that might be true on top of Har Sinai. But kachi darkoi shel olam, he says, minaga olam, in this physical world, you cannot create a bastion of Kedusha until you set up firm and steadfast and very, very impenetrable mechitzas, so that the winds and the culture of outside is not able to permeate through. If you want kedusha, the very first step must be to set up mechitzas. So Moshe Rabbeinu, you are correct in your pristine thought on your madrega. Yes, I could first build the kelim and get the mishkan up and running, and then the walls. But says Betzalel, Moshe Rabbeinu, min hagel shel olam, in this world, the world that Klal Yisrael resides in our world, Minhagel Shel Olam, the only way to have a place of Kedusha is first to separate a place off, separate from what's going out on the street, separate from the world at large. Then you can make a space, so to speak, for the Rebbeinu Shem. Says Moshe Rabbeinu to Betzalel, Shema B'Tzel Kel Hayisa. Tzel is shade. Here I see that you understand the importance of separating out, separating a place of shade, to separate yourself from the world at large, from the sun, which represents Olam Hazeh. You have to put a block, a tzel there, in order to create a place for the Rebbeinu Shalom. Shema Tzitzel Kel Hayisa. This is the understanding of what really is at the crux of this medrash, Al Pi Pshat. But I'd like to take it one step deeper, the Machlokes. Again, I'll be the same derech, but to understand even on a deeper level what exactly is going on between Moshe Rabbeinu and Betzalel. And I think that if we understand fully the creation of Mishkan, or at least have a proper perspective on the building of the Mishkan, it will help us understand this conversation between Moshe Rabbeinu and Betzalel. Because we know that the Mishkan was like no other construction in the entire world. In fact, it's pointed out by the Aruch HaShulchan, many Mefarshim, but the Aruch HaShulchan in this week's parsha has a beautiful, in his drashas Kol Levi, has a beautiful, Kol Ben Levi, has a beautiful ha'ara, that usually when it comes to the end of a physical construction, even Beis HaMikdash, the lashon is a lashon of hashlama, right? That's what it says in Malachim, V'tashlim kol ha-malacha, and V'tashlim kol ha-malacha in Divrei Hayamim, V'tishlam ha-choyma. We conclude the construction. Therefore, you would expect, just like Beis HaMikdash, the same thing would be when it comes to a Mishkan. It should use the lashon of hashlama. However, we know that that's not the language that the Torah uses. Vayichal Moshe es hamelacha. Vayichal. Why? Clearly referencing that this creation was like no other. This creation was modeled after Brias HaOlam. Yoideya haya Betzalel litzarev oisi oishe behoyan nivra HaOlam. The creation of Betzalel was a creation of Brias HaOlam. And every aspect of the Mishkan, as Rav Chaim points out, correspond to an aspect of Brias HaOlam, quoting from the Zohar. The Kir was connected, the Yam, every single part of the Mishkan corresponded to a Bria in Brias HaOlam. Yodeya haya Betzalel litzarev oisi oishe behem nivra HaOlam was a mini Brias HaOlam, and therefore just like Brias HaOlam concludes Vayichal Elokim, so therefore over here as well it's Vayichal. Everything in Brias HaOlam is modeled, everything in the Mishkan, the building of the Mishkan, is modeled after Brias HaOlam. Now, there's something unique or interesting about Brias HaOlam. You see, if I were to ask you, what was the first thing created in the world? So, I would say the first thing was whatever was created in Yom Rishon, Yehi Or, right? Light and darkness, right? These were the things that created first. But Chazal tell us that there are two different perspectives, obviously. In any creation, we could understand there are two different perspectives. Soif Maisa b'machshava tchila, we say in L'chadoidi. What does that mean? Soif Maisa b'machshava tchila. That means that Shabbos was b'machshava tchila. The tachlis of creation was Shabbos. It's the last day to be experienced. So was it first or was it the end? Well, b'machshava, in terms of when my thought process, I go to the tachlis, what I want. But then in practical life, in practical earthly natural world, I have to build up to the tachlis. So whatever is soif maisa is b'machshava tchila. The machshava that came first, which is the tachlis, is always the last thing in the physical world. Think about a person that builds a house, right? So his machshava tchila is, I want a big, beautiful house, for me to live in, right? But there's a lot of steps to get to that final result. Of course, the machshava that came first is the last thing to actually come to fruition. The tachlis is always first in the olam ha-machshava, and is always last to manifest in olam ha-maisa. Shabbos was the tachlis of all of creation, and therefore it was the first in terms of the Rebbeinu Shalom's thought, kaviyachol, but it was the final product in actualization in coming to this world. The same thing with Adam Harishon. The Medrash says, Ochor vekedem tzartani, based on the pasuk in Tehillim, Ochor vekedem tzartani. What does it mean? Was Adam Harishon created first or last? Well, soif ma'asim achshavat chila. The tachlis habriya was for an Adam. But in order to get to the tachlis, and therefore the first thought was of course the tachlis. But now we have to go through the process in Olam HaMaisa, and therefore build up to it. Whatever is first in Olam HaMachshava will always be last in the Olam HaMaisa. Now, this is the nature of creation. When it comes to Olam HaMachshava, the result is immediately, and therefore, the Tachlis is always the first thing. When it comes distilled and actualized in the real world, or what we refer to as the real world, so then that first thought, which is the Tachlis, is always has to be built up to, and therefore is the last thing to take place. Therefore, this was the reality when it came to Brias Ha'olam. This is an important understanding to understand this medrash between Moshe and Betzalel for the following reason. Reb Zevin, right? Reb Zevin writes a fascinating, Shlomo Yosef Zevin has a fascinating piece where he writes the distinction between Shammai and Hillel. He writes, if you go throughout Shas, looking at the different stories, the different agaritas about Shammai and Hillel, and even the different halachic machlokes between Shammai and Hillel, it all comes down to one basic machshava. We know that Beis Shammai was much sharper. Beis Shammai were more kapdonim. They were much harsher. In the Olam HaKabbalah, they were mitzad ha-gevura. Beis Hillel was much lighter. They referred to them as mitzad ha-chesed. But in reality, this really has its roots elsewhere. The pasuk tells us, that there was a machlokes, Shemayim kadmu or Eretz kadmu. The Medrash says there was a machlokes between Shammai and Hillel. What was created first? Shemayim or Aretz. And the way Reb Zevin understands this is, Shemayim is the Olam HaMachshava. Shemayim is not here in this physical world. Shemayim represents the supernatural, the beyond physical, realizing that this physical world has its limitations and that the real world is the Olam HaMachshava. And Beis Shammai focuses on that, and that's why Beis Shammai says the Shemayim was created first. Beis Hillel focuses on the world that we're living in, and Beis Hillel says Eretz is considered to be first. We have to live in this world, practical world, the world that we encounter, and therefore the world that we could observe, and therefore Eretz comes first. The basic machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is, do you look towards the supernatural, the Olam HaMachshava, that which is beyond this world, or do you work to the Olam HaMaisa, the practical world that we are in? That's why you will always see Beis Shammai in halacha following machshava. Go throughout halacha, he brings many, many cases. For instance, Beis Shammai holds of the shita that we say, Shebara me'or ha'esh. Why? Because Bisham in Havdalah, instead of ba'oire me'oire ha'esh. Beis Hillel is looking at the fire that is in front of us, and Beis Hillel says, Ba'ire, he created this fire right in front of me, in the world that I could detect. Beis Shammai is talking about the Yisoid ha'esh that the Rebbeinu Shalom created, and therefore it's all talking about Sheishes Yimei Bereishis, Bara me'or ha'esh. You could go further and see that Beis Shammai holds of the Shita, Matana Shelo Hormu, Kimisha Hormudami. Even before I've separated Trumas and Maestras, we look at it as if it's already done. If my Machshava intends to do it, in the world of Beis Shammai, everything goes Be'asar Machshava. The Olam HaMachshava is reality. That's why Beis Shammai holds, Kol Shtar Ha'oimed Ligbois, Beis Shammai holds, a person merely writes a get for his wife, hasn't given it yet, she's already psula le kuhuna, because I intend to give it. The olam hamachshava decides. Beis Shammai holds that there's such a thing as you're not allowed to do a malacha even before Shabbos that will end up resulting on Shabbos. Why? I didn't do anything on Shabbos. Practically, yes, but since in my machshava I put something into place that will have it be done on Shabbos, therefore Beis Shammai is always going basar the machshava. Perhaps the greatest example, I don't know why he doesn't bring it, the greatest example is the Machlokes of shlichus yad. If I give something to you to watch for me, once you touch it, so then you become chayiv. You're not allowed to use it, you're a shomer. So Betzalel, of course, holds, once you touch it, you become chayiv. Beis Shammai says, once I made the decision to touch it, then it's already I'm chayiv. Even the machshava alone. Beis Shammai always follows the machshava, because he lives in the reality, not in this aretzdika world, he lives in the reality of Shamayim. I would even venture to say that who holds that b'tishrei nivra ha'olam? Tosfos tells us that Rabbi Eliezer Shita b'tishrei nivra ha'olam. Rabbi Eliezer understands that really it was only nivra b'machshava of the Rebbeinu Shalom. And of course, Rabbi Eliezer is Shamuti, a Talmud of Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai resides in the realm of machshava. Shamayim nivra rishon. Beis Hillel resides in the realm of Maisa. Oretz nivra Risha. This is the basic machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and that's why, while in this world we certainly paskin like Beis Hillel, the Kabbalim tell us in the next world we will certainly paskin like Beis Shammai. Shela asid lavo tiya halacha ke Beis Shammai, and it makes a lot of sense because the asid lavo will all be residing in the world where machshava reigns supreme. We won't have the veil of the physical world, and therefore everyone will agree that we will paskin like Beis Shammai. We've mentioned many times throughout Sefer Shemos that Moshe Rabbeinu always is the predecessor, if you will, for Shitas Beis Shammai. Loi ish dvarim anoichi soifei tevois Shammai. Moshe Rabbeinu would always advance the shita of gvura, of din, as the Gemara says in Sanhedrin. Yikoi vadin es hahar. Aaron may have been Hillel, oiv shalom v'mroidev shalom, hu yiyeh lecha lefeh, but Beis Shammai was Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu lived in the world of machshava. In the world of machshava, what comes first? The tachlis comes first. Soif maisa b'machshava tchila. He comes to Betzalel in the world that Moshe Rabbeinu resided in and says, we always go with the tachlis first. In the world of machshava, it's soif maisa machshava tchila. The first thing that comes is the tachlis. First, let's build the aron and the kalim, and then you'll build the mishkan around it. Comes Betzalel and says, no, this world is a world of maisa. We follow the shita of Aaron, the shita of Beis Hillel. In this world, even though the machshava is the tachlis, but it's soif maisa b'machshava tchila. That's the last thing to happen in actuality. First, we have to prepare for that tachlis. We have to build a home. We have to build a mishkan. Then we'll have the place for the Shechina to reside. The machlokes between Betzalel and Moshe is a machlokes of soif maisa b'machshava tchila. If you reside in the world of machshava, so yes, the tachlis comes first. If you reside in this physical world, the tachlis comes first in thought, but in actuality, I have to build up and prepare for it. Says Betzalel, in the world that we live in, we first have to build a mishkan. Comes Moshe Rabbeinu to Betzalel and says, Shema B'Tzel Kel Hayisa. Tzel, once again, you live in this world, you block out the Shamayim. The Shamayim is the world of Machshava. You realize that I was residing in the world of Machshava. In the world of Machshava, the Tachlis comes first. You could just build an Aron without a Mishkan. But you live down here in the world. You've been able to create shade to block out the Shamayim, realizing that in this world, you can't run to the Tachlis. But really, even though the Tachlis is the crux, the world was created for Shabbos, the world was created for Adam HaRishon, but in practicality, the way that has to evolve, the way that has to manifest itself in the physical world is Soif Maisa Machshava Tchila. First we build the Mishkan, first we build the walls, and only after that could we create a situation which is ready for the Tachlis.